Welcome back to Raising the Bar, a podcast aimed to lift up the stories and share the information and wisdom to inspire a new generation of female attorneys. In this episode, Myrna and Taylor meet with Angela Zambrano and discuss the professional and personal experiences around navigating job interviews and making connections as a legal professional.
Hello, my name is Mirna Rodriguez.
And I'm Taylor Nicolo.
Today we will be hosting our first episode. Our guest speaker today is Angela Zambrano.
Angela Zambrano co-leads Sidley's Dallas office and is a premier commercial litigator, having recently been named the American Lawyers Litigator of the Week based on her complete victory in a $100 million earnout arbitration proceeding, shortlisted as a Litigator of the Year by IFLR's Women in Business Law, and recognized in commercial litigation by Best Lawyers in America from 2016 to 2022. Angela has won many high-profile cases in a wide variety of areas within commercial litigation, and her arbitration experience has earned her a spot on the American Arbitration Association's roster of arbitrators. Welcome, Angela. We are so excited to speak with you today about making a good impression at interviews in order to secure a job.
So let's begin. We chose this topic because as new legal professionals, we are navigating a very tough path, and we would like to hear about your experience navigating interviews, interviewing people yourself, and the job search.
So, can you walk us through your career trajectory and talk about your job interview experience?
Well, hello, and thank you so much for having me. It's great to be on, and I'm so excited that you all came up with this very cool program. I am a commercial litigator, as you all said, at Sidley Austin, so in big law. I'm going to go back to, though, law school, because I think actually your career trajectory very much starts in law school. That's where you build your first contacts and your network is in law school. So I went to law school at SMU, Dedman School of Law. I graduated from there. I did a clerkship with a judge on the Court of Appeals for the 10th Circuit. And then I worked at a law firm named Weil, Gotshal and Manges. Now they're just known as Weil. About 10 years ago, I moved from that firm to Sidley Austin with a group of partners, the majority of whom were women. I have always been a commercial litigator. I have a variety of different specialties. My favorite things to do within the firm, though, are working with the firm's women program and hiring and interviewing. I was the hiring partner for many years at Weil, and I've been the hiring partner here at Sidley prior to the time that I was running the office.
So, what skills did you learn to equip you for interview jitters, confidence, and showcasing your strengths?
So, I don't know if I learned any of those skills when I was in law school. I think I learned those skills actually a long time before that at part-time jobs that I had when, in middle school and high school and in college. So the good news is if you have ever had any type of employment before at all of those skills, I think, are very much transferable. I think law is a service industry, and the service industry involves talking to people, selling things, making a good impression, being detail oriented, being, sensitive and thoughtful to clients' wishes and desires and preferences. And so I think that I learned a lot of those interview skills just, in that process early on getting a first job. I think the difference between, regular jobs, if you will, in law is maybe twofold. First is having some understanding of the lingo, if you will, in the legal industry. I would encourage everyone to get familiar with that. I was a first generation lawyer with a blue collar background, and I didn't have the book on the lingo to use. But I think you guys can easily do that. You ladies can do that easily by getting familiar with that sort of thing online. And I think it's important to have that vocabulary. The second thing that I think that you should do that's maybe different, a little bit different from your normal job, is really understanding the particular kind of law that you are, or the job in law that you're looking at. So, for example, my firm, in my office, we do a lot of different kinds of litigation, but we don't do environmental litigation. That's just not something that we've, ever had an expert. None of the partners in my group are focused on that. So if someone came into my office and was interviewing for a job with environmental litigation, it would show that they really hadn't spent very much time looking at what, our office really does. It's great that they're interested in that, but maybe they're interested in something else would be better to focus on during the interview, just because it shows that you care about enough to research the job. And I think that's a little bit more the case in law than in other jobs, that lawyers really want to know that you are focused on the particular areas of law. And I have a general commercial practice, so you don't have to be zeroed in on something particularly narrow. It's just that you've spent the time to understand what the person or the group is doing before you walk in the door. And other than that, I think having normal jitters and issues regarding confidence and how you interview, which we should talk about, of course, today, it's not going to be anything different than getting any other job.
So you touched on this a little bit in your previous response, and you talked about having experience being in the legal hiring component. Is there anything that young legal professionals can do to make themselves stand out and learn from you so that they can secure a job right out of law school?
So wherever you're at in law school, they have, or they should have, but I believe they all do, some sort of on-campus program. So on-campus hiring. So get familiar with that system. When does it occur? It occurs at a different time of the year, for example, for first years and second years. You should know that for your particular school. The good news is with COVID, I understand that a lot of those, quote, on-campus interviews are actually virtual now. And the reason that is a good thing is that I think different firms are more likely to come to your campus remotely than they are probably, than they would be willing to do necessarily before, because it takes resources away from the firm to travel and to send people and all that. So first of all, being familiar with the firm's on-campus program, with your law school's on-campus program is really important. And making friends with the folks in your on-campus recruiting department or hiring department is really important, because we talk to those folks all day long when we go in person. We talk to those folks when we go back to alumni groups. We ask people, whenever we can, tell me about your star students. And so being familiar with those folks and other folks on the faculty and administration is really helpful. The second thing I would say is write in. I think this is it's not fashionable anymore to write in. It's sort of like a pen pals from the yesteryear. But actually, I very much care who's just dropping their resume with me where we're not going on campus. And the reason that I care is because for two reasons. One is that the person is particularly interested in my firm. They're not just going through the motions because the firm is on campus and they're just dropping with everyone and might as well drop with Sidley too. I know that they're particularly interested in Sidley, number one. Number two, I am able to diversify my hiring with different schools and different types of people if I have write-in. So I'm particularly interested in who's in that pile they used to be physical piles. They're not anymore, but that virtual pile of resumes where they, have written in and they're not just through an on-campus program. So that's the second thing you should do. And then the third thing you should do is get very involved in, I shouldn't say very involved, as involved as your studies will allow. And, based on how you're doing in law school, you should calibrate that because grades come first, learning to write comes first. But there are a lot of different organizations that are offered on your campuses where you meet people where you might get job opportunities or job, different just introductions that help. So whether that be kind of a moot court or a mock trial or that sort of thing where you meet a judge. I met judges in my moot court experience that I still am in contact with today. And so those extracurriculars are great too. They're not as immediate in getting a job, but it is worth your time.
So you kind of spoke on this, but what advice would you give a woman who is not successful in the OCI process and who went through the entire on-campus process but didn't get any interviews back, didn't get any feedback back? What advice would you give them to keep going forward?
So my advice is going to depend there on whether you did a bunch of OCI interviews and you didn't get callbacks, or whether because of, where you're at in the class or the grade system or whatever, you just weren't getting those interviews. A lot of the interviewing we do on campus is just frankly very much based on grades. It just is. And some firms are going to be the same way. You should just know who those firms are and not waste your time, because it is, and to some degree, it's just going to be wasting the time. But if you got a bunch of interviews and you're not getting the next phone call, then I think you need to figure out some sort of a mentor and have the conversation with, a mentor and say, gee, this is what happened to me. What do you think? I would take that kind of phone call from a law student who, and in fact, now that I say that, I did take that phone call during COVID from someone, and I need to look him up because I had this kind of conversation with him and I was really impressed that he had reached out and done that. And I gave him some feedback, and I don't know where he landed, so I need to find out. But I did give him a couple of leads because of that. So I think that particularly if you're interviewing in Texas, and I can only speak really to the Dallas market, but we're pretty friendly in Texas. And so if somebody reaches out to me and takes the time to do that, I'm going to return the phone call. So back on the grades, if you're not getting the interviews because of where you fall in your class or your grades, that doesn't mean give up. It means that you need to be more creative. So two of my closest friends from law school and at the time in law school and now in life did not end up in the top, 1/3 of their class. One was barely in the top half. Both of them have been general counsels at publicly traded companies. So it is just a different little path than you have out of the sort of cookie cutter path like I did coming straight out of law school. It doesn't mean that you don't have a career in corporate law at all, if that's what you're interested in. If you're not interested, by the way, in corporate law, then I would really think about whether you even want to bother with this. Because if you're interested in family law or criminal defense law or public interest law or other things, this is really not the system for you. There's a whole different way of getting a job in those spaces.
So you talked a lot about grades and this like cookie cutter pathway into getting into corporate law. So what are some ways to make, if you have the grades, how else can you stand apart? Because there's a lot of people in the 1/3 of the class that also has those grades. So what's going to make you stand apart?
Okay, great question. And now I'm on. Okay, first of all, you want to have this balance. You want to have this balance between not being overly confident and not being shy is not the right word, but conveying the impression that you are not in command of the interview. Okay. And here's why. We are interviewing people to put almost immediately in front of our clients. And so if you get the impression that the person you are interviewing is unsure of themselves, unsure of their legal advice, right? There's a pretty clear parallel there. So you want to convey that you are knowledgeable, you've done your homework about the vocabulary, and you've done the homework about the particular firm. And then you want to know yourself. You want to know every single thing on your resume, because they will ask the thing that you feel the most insecure about. I always go directly to the little interest at the bottom, because I'm like, why did someone put that thing down there? Did they put something down there because they think it looks good, or is it actually something that they're interested in? And you can tell if someone's bluffing or it's not really honest on that one. So think about that one for sure, what you put in that space in your resume. But that is the number one way to in my view, to stand out, is that balance between being overly confident and insecure. You want that sweet spot in between. You want to know your resume inside and out. You want to be approachable, but and be interested in what you're hearing from the firm, but then you want to have thoughtful questions as well. And you should run those by somebody. Just, run them by someone in the career development office. Is this a good thing to ask? I bet there's something online you could figure out how to ask. A couple things that I would tell you to ask if you're interviewing at Big Law. I think it is really important how assignments are given out. And that is not something that's intuitive, but it's really important from a career development standpoint to determine whether, you're going to have to go knock on doors everywhere to go find work every day or week of your career, or if there is a central assignment system where someone is in charge of finding you work. That can really impact your psyche in terms of whether you like a job. So that's a sophisticated question. When you're up for partner, not a sophisticated question, because it's all available online, first of all. Second of all, it's so long out. I mean, so many people do so many things in 9 years that it's not really people ask this question, but it's not a super savvy question. Understanding how you can practice, within different groups, or if there's clear lines. So for example, in my commercial litigation practice, someone could do something, in antitrust, they could do something in employment, they could do something breach of contract, they could do something in appeals. It's all in my group. Other law firms, those are all particular practice areas, and you would have to commit to those specialties within the law. You couldn't sort of, move around and fluidly and have multiple areas of expertise. So those are a couple questions, but having those couple questions on top of finding that sweet spot of being confident and not overly confident. By the way, I rarely see women that are overconfident. I just don't. And so whatever your natural level of confidence is, I would say amp it up just one level higher, because, shake that hand, look straight in the eyes, be ready with a comment about not necessarily the news, because that can be so political, but maybe the weather, I don't know. But be ready to talk about the obvious things on your resume, what you did last summer, your favorite class, what are you enrolled in right now? Those are all table stakes. Those are all things you should completely be expecting.
That's a really great response. We spent a lot of time talking about making a good impression during your interview. Is there, one, how important is that? And two, is there any way that someone can recover from making a bad impression? We know that the legal community is very small, especially in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Is there any way to mend any burnt bridges or any way to salvage a bad impression?
So I've never had someone make such an impression that I feel like that if I see them again in the legal community that it's like a bad thing. So first of all, I don't think you can mess things up probably there to that degree. In terms though of how to make a good impression and whether it can be fixed within a 30-minute period, probably not. So it's a 30-minute period. It's just not, you don't have long-term memory during that period of time. And so one thing that I have noticed, we just have had some events in the office recently for different law schools, and there is a trend towards casualness. And I think you should avoid that. I think that there is a time and a place for casualness. You get a job, you be casual as much as you want. But I think that you are trying to dress and act like the people that you are trying to work for. And so those people are probably all not necessarily wearing a suit, but certainly a dress, probably a suit. You're the one interviewing. So you're going to want to dress to that part. Almost if I'm a litigator, if I was going to court. So I think there's a trend towards casualness, and I would resist that for sure. In terms, though, of other things that people have done to make a bad impression, I think just being a little too casual with language, I'm not saying I'm perfect on this front, but, there was using curse words. If you're in a casual setting, like over drinks or so forth, you might think that's appropriate. It's really not. It leaves the wrong impression. Not because it's a bad thing if you were to get a job there, but just this is the only time I have to meet with you. And it just sends the wrong message. Again, I think these are all like basic things, but I just had a thing 2 weeks ago, and so maybe they're not. So those two things, and then casual language in terms of, what you did last summer, I would be prepared again to talk about not necessarily specifically what it was that you did, right? You wrote memos or you did whatever. You're going to want to be legalistic in the way you describe, I work for this agency and that what they do is, or I work for the judge and he or she sits in this area and we looked at or I particularly looked at cases on X, Y, or Z in the legal industry. You want to make sure that you're not being sort of casual about the job. You're dressing it up just like you would on your resume.
Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate that. So is there any last piece of advice that you would have for our listeners before we go?
I have a lot. Let me just say to start with that 90% of what you do to get a job is going to be done in the classroom. And so, just learn to write, take more legal writing than you would ever imagine that you would have before you started law school. The practice of law is both sales and it is writing. Those are the two things that it's most important. You have to communicate, and then people have to want to purchase your services. So you have to be able to sell them. And so that writing piece is really accomplished in law school. So get your writing skills, really developed in law school. And then the second thing I would say is the reason I said your legal career starts in law school is that you're thinking about your first job in a firm and you're thinking of employment in it in that way. That's not how I think of employment, actually. I think of employment as the clients who want to hire me. And so that started in law school. And the reason it started in law school is because that's when I started developing a reputation. I developed a certain persona that people would think of me, right? I had brand. People thought of, Angela asks a lot of questions. I would translate that hopefully as being intellectually curious, but certainly I asked a lot of questions. Somebody that says something, they're going to do something and then they do it. They have integrity. You're trying to develop that brand. You're trying to develop somebody, a brand is, someone who's serious, not a gossiper or somebody that's, silly in law school. This is professional. You want to develop your brand all the way back in law school because not very long after law school, you're already getting referrals from people that you were in law school with for jobs, for clients. Those are jobs. So I want you to think about what you're doing right now to keep food on the table in 10 years. It's right now. So, some of y'all I know are in this leadership program, and that is terrific. That's exactly what you should be doing because you're building a network of people that will refer you matters in the future. And there's nothing that you can do other than studying right now that's more important to your career development.
Well, thank you so much, Miss Angela, for this episode of On the Record Stories and Lessons from Women in Law. We appreciate your time and your kind, wise words. And thank you, everyone, for listening to this episode. And stay tuned for more episodes on Navigating Law School.